And you judge people by their character, what they're grounded in, not by what they can flash for a moment or two. The Bible said the race is not given to the swift, nor to the strong, but those that can endure. There was a woman that endured from civil rights activism days and rose to the pinnacle of power in Washington, but never forgot her commitment to the movement and the cause and young people. And that was Emily Clyburn. This woman took strength that many of us don't have. It takes some kind of strength to be out front. It takes more strength to take a step back and push the ones out front and not let your ego get in the way of your agenda. And that is why we wanted today to give an award in her name, because if all of us had a little Emily in us, we'd be further down the road. You don't have to star on every show. You don't have to be out front of every gathering. You don't have to be the one on the front page every morning. As long as the work gets done, you will get your due. Still water runs deep. And I wanted the young people in National Action Network to always know of this still strong woman. So when I asked Reverend Rivers and the ministers and membership here that we would have this post-debate breakfast and let the candidates all give a few minutes, I said we must name one award after her because she was so strong and consistent and always kind. And even when we messed up, she was firm but understanding. I remember a few times I would say, you know, Miss Clyburn, so. She said, I know you did, but you didn't mean it, Al. She, before I created the narrative of why I didn't do what she knew I did, she forgave me and confirmed I did it all at the same time. So we said, well, who can we give this to? There's no one that earned it more than her life soulmate. They met in the movement. They went to jail together. And he never, ever forgot that she was the wind beneath his wings. And the reason why Jim Clyburn can walk around Washington with an inner peace and an inner security, unlike anyone I've seen in the leadership in Washington, is he knew where his grounding was, he knew where his back was covered, he knew that no matter whether it went good or bad, that Emily would be there, and as long as she was there, his title and position in Washington was not the end of his life. He never let you forget she was the one that was his backbone. And he has never let this nation forget that the people in South Carolina sent him there for a reason, not a season. There is no one with more integrity and sacrifice that have gone to Washington that didn't get blinded by the lights. Some we sent up there, and next thing we know, they're trying to sit up on Abe Lincoln's lap at the Lincoln Memorial. But then others go and try to get the laws done and get us protected. And that's what Jim and Emily did. So we're proud to present to you the winner from our National Action Network, Emily Clyburn Award, her soulmate, Congressman James Clyburn.
Thank you. As many of you know, I'm a PK. So I really want to honor all of you today, but I sympathize with you. I want to congratulate all of the honorees today. I leaned over to tell her, I said, tell her, how old are you? You aren't supposed to ask a woman that, but I did. And she told me. So I turned 46 last Friday. I said, don't you know that I was your mama and daddy's Cupid? True. Herbert and his late wife met while she was in my employment at the South Carolina Commission for Farm Workers. So I remember when she was born, and I've heard you preach in my hometown of Sumter. You deserve this award, and I thank you so much for that long visit. I've heard Brother Holt sat in this church. I have been a part of the emancipation. I remember here in Charleston, when I lived here, we always looked forward to the Emancipation Day Parade, which we no longer have. Thank you for keeping all of that alive. And Ms. Mapp, thank you. You and I have interacted on problems surrounding home ownership for so many years. Thank you, and congratulations. And I just want all the members of North Charleston Council to know how much I'm looking forward to working with you over the next several months. Because I don't know how many of you know this or not, but a recent study done by Princeton University has listed North Charleston, South Carolina as having the highest eviction rate in the United States of America. That's a fact. And it highlights what is required of us. I chair the House Democrats' Faith Working Group. And I've chaired that since 2004, working with our members, our Democratic members, getting them to feel comfortable with their faith, whatever it is. And when Nancy Pelosi asked me to do that, I demurred. I told her maybe she should get one of the ministers in our caucus. She said, no, I've been listening to your speeches. I've been reading your writings. There's a faith element to you that ain't denominational. And I think I want you to do it. So that night I called my pastor at the time, Joe Darby. I called Joe, I told him what was being asked of me, and I asked him, what do you think I should do? He said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but what I will advise you is to go back and read the book of James. Now, the book of James has always been my favorite book of the Bible, not just because of my name, but it's such a short book of the Bible. You can read all 5 of those chapters in one sitting and think you've done something. So I went back and I picked up the Bible and I started reading. When I got into the 2nd chapter, I saw exactly what Joe was saying to me. But I was not satisfied with that. I called him back. I said, now let's work through what James was thinking about when he wrote this epistle. And many of you know from your studies that James wrote that epistle around 44 AD, 44 years after Christ had ascended. And there was a great division among the believers, the followers, as to what was required of them. Some of them felt that all you needed to do was just profess your belief. Your relationship with the Almighty, according to them, was your personal relationship, had nothing to do with anybody else. So long as you keep your faith with the Almighty, nobody else had anything to do with that. James disagreed. And he should have known what's required of them. He was reported to be Jesus' brother. He had traveled with him. And he sat down to instruct the followers. He wrote that if your brother or sister comes to you hungry or naked, it's not enough to pray for them. It's not enough to tell them to go in faith. You feed them and you clothe them, because faith without works is dead. That resounded with me. And that is what really makes me who I am. Because I really believe that if James were writing that epistle today, he would say, if your brother or sister comes to you hungry, naked, sick, you provide them with health care. And so, what I try to do in every waking moment is to live out my pledge to the people of South Carolina, making America's greatness accessible and affordable for all. There are billboards around Charleston with that pledge on it. Reverend Al, those billboards are up in honor of Emily. Emily always told me, I don't care how many radio ads you buy, how many TV ads you produce, when you run for office, for me, I want to see billboards. And someone asked me the other day, why you got up billboards? Because Emily told me to put up billboards. So I never run without billboards. And one of the people came in, she was from Texas, Houston, Texas. And she said, I almost had a wreck coming from the airport. I saw this billboard, and your name was there, but there was no picture. I always see politicians' pictures on the billboard. I didn't think it was a good thing to put the picture of the real congressperson there. But I put my name there because Emily told me it ain't about you. It's about Monk's Corner, where she was born and raised. It's about rural South Carolina. And I just want to say to all of you who have gotten awards, I hope that you will demonstrate in the days, weeks, and years ahead that you are deserving, because I am going to work with all that is within me to demonstrate that I'm deserving of this honor you've given me today. I just hope I live long enough to do so. Thank you, and thank you.
Congressman James Clyburn. Come on, give it to him. We have invited the presidential candidates that will be on the ballot here on Saturday to come and address this gathering of activist leaders and faith leaders, a few minutes each, all of them having to move around the state and into Super Tuesday. So we told them to only speak a few minutes, and we are not asking them to give us a sermon. We're preachers. Give us your opening 5 minutes and move on. Let me say, in introducing the first one, I've known Joe Biden for decades, and the thing that has always stuck out in my mind is, even if I disagreed on an issue, I argued about the crime bill in '94. He was always open, and he would always tell me what he really felt and made me understand that he listened to what we felt. The 8 years that he was the vice president, he came and spoke at National Action Network 3 or 4 times. I'm not talking about had us to the vice president's house. I mean, he traveled to New York and did our convention. He came and did our Martin Luther King Day as vice president. He worked with our Washington Bureau. And when he wanted to deal with the unintended consequences of the crime bill, He came and did our Martin Luther King breakfast before he had announced he was running for president, and addressed it on our platform first on Martin Luther King Day as a guest of Martin Luther King III and I. So I have known him, worked with him. I can tell you that as one that had access to President Obama, that many of the things that we saw happen that were progressive, and you know, progressive is such a loose term now that everybody's progressive. I had room service this morning. I had a progressive waiter that was arguing with me on what kind of sweetener I was using, because I don't use regular sugar, I use another kind. He had a more progressive kind. I was trying to get it sweet and get out of there. So y'all can have all these progressive arguments. I'm trying to get to progress, not to the title. Some folks are progressive about everything but race. They got every agenda but a black agenda. He has always dealt squarely, and I'm telling you in the room, he would push a lot of things that wouldn't have got pushed. I know because I was there, and I would hear it, and I would know what happened. And he would go out and support the president, never saying what was done, largely in some cases because he advocated so strongly. So it is no surprise he was the first one to say, no, Rev. Mal, I'll come by there and ask later how many people and who else. He didn't even know we were honoring Clyburn. And he's here first this morning. So we're having them speak in the order they come. I'm not, for the media, I'm not telling you the lineup that'll happen Saturday. Now, of course, if it comes down that way, I'm going to say I prophesied it and take the credit. But on Wednesday, I'm not going to say that. But hold the tape. Let us hear from the former Vice President of the United States, former U.S. Senator from Delaware, former Vice President Joe Biden.
My name's Joe Biden. I've been working for the Rev for a long time. Rev, thank you very much for the introduction. Jim, the overwhelming reason why I wanted to be here is because you were being honored. You know, folks, as was said earlier, a lot of folks talk the talk, very few people walk the walk. And Jim Clyburn is a man of enormous integrity. I consider it a great privilege that I got to meet Miss Emily. And I got to know his daughters, and still do. Tell you what, this is a man who does what he says he's going to do. And this is a man who I think is, you know, you're never a prophet in your own city, your own town. But the fact is, Jim, you're one of the finest men I've ever met, not just in public life, but period. And I know many of you know, because you've experienced loss, how difficult it is to even get up and say what Jim just said. Because when you start talking about Miss Emily, when I start talking about my deceased wife or my son, no matter what the honor, it is hard. It's hard. Because it leaves a hole in your heart. And, you know, Jim's heard me say this before, and the Rev knows. There was a theologian named Kierkegaard who said, faith sees best in the dark. One of the things that I find is that I don't know how people make it, quite frankly. I'm not proselytizing, but I don't know how people make it without faith. No, I really mean it. Now, by the way, in case you're looking at my dirty forehead, I happen to be a practicing Catholic. I was a little late because I had to show up at a local church and get ashes this morning because my mother would come down from heaven if, in fact, I hadn't done this. So, Mom, I got my ashes. I'm here. But Jim is a guy who, I'm not going to take, I'm trying to keep this really short because there's so much to say about Jim. The fact of the matter is, Barack, I call him Barack because I don't want to confuse him with the president, okay? But he's my friend. You know, the reason why we're able to get what we got done on the Affordable Care Act, the reason why we're able to get done what we got done on the Recovery Act, which put $500 million just into Charleston and the port and creating jobs, is because of Jim Clyburn. Jim Clyburn is the reason, along with Nancy Pelosi, that we're able to get the Affordable Care Act passed. We didn't have one single Republican vote. But when Jim talks to people, he doesn't lecture them. When he talks to them, he informs them. He informs them like he informed everybody here this morning. James the Apostle was a man who talked about not your words, but your deeds. Everything Jim has done in his entire career has been about helping people. It's kind of basic stuff, you think, but it's not that all that basic. It's never been about Jim. It's been about the other guy, the other woman. And that's the way he has led and why everybody looks to him. And I'm not just being nice because I'm standing here and Jim's behind me. You all know it. People respect him. The first thing a man or woman has to establish is their sense of honor, dignity, respect. Just simple respect. So when Jim talks about, when I talk to Jim, he says, Joe, you know, everything's basically in threes here. It's about what you're going to do for you, for the person, what you're going to do for the family, and what you're going to do for the community. And everything Jim does gets looked through that prism. And look how much better off everybody is. But we got more work to do, a lot more work to do. You know, I'll end by saying this, and by the way, thank you for having me at your church, Rev. Talk about preaching. I tell you what, he not only preached when I was there and gave me an opportunity to speak, but he also is able to inject a history lesson at the same time. But you know, Jim, I think that people should understand that what you all understand in this room. They do it and they know it intuitively. As I said in your church, Rev, that sometimes I wake up and I think it's 1920 and not 2020. Wow. The way in which, I really mean it, the way in which we talk to one another today, the way in which the debasing of politics has occurred, the way in which this President Trump has so demeaned individuals and people, the idea that you'd ever have a president who'd make fun of somebody with a physical disability, or make fun, no, I really mean it. And it takes voices and character like Jim has to change it. This is a man who has a lot of reason, like a lot of you in this room, to be angry and not generous. This is a man who came from a very humble background. But this is a man who reaches out to everybody. Everybody. And folks, thank God we have all of you in this room, but also particularly Jim, because he reminds us of who we are. What you're doing at least to my brethren, you're doing to me. That's what it's about. That's how I was raised. And Jim, whether I'm still around or not, you got a lot of work to do. And whether I'm president or not, I'm going to be there to help you do the work no matter what. Because folks, Folks, a country badly needs women and men of character. Character is on the ballot this time around. And the man with the most character, the people I work with are sitting behind me here, he is the one who everybody's looking to. And Jim, you better hope I don't win because you're going to be the busiest man in the world. God love you all. Thank you for having me. And may God bless our troops.
Vice President Biden, give him a hand. One of the things that we want to see in whomever is the next president is one that will respect and give access. And as we honored those in South Carolina leadership today, the candidates coming by giving a few minutes of what they want to say to our leaders is also to respect those that we honor. One of the things the present occupant of the White House has is no respect for our community and the leadership of our community. You cannot rent or lease leaders for a season rather than those that have earned and fought leadership for a lifetime. Our next speaker has been one that our Washington Bureau has reported every time we called on her, she was there way before she ran for president. She spoke at our policy conferences. She's worked her staff with our staff on various issues of criminal justice. When we had questions to raise about certain prosecutions in Minnesota, she would answer. And she has been one that respects and regards a lot of what this organization stands for. So it is not just because she is a name on the ballot that we invited her and that I talk often with her. May we hear from the senator from Minnesota, candidate for president, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton. Thank you so much also to Reverend Benton for hosting us. And it's wonderful to see, I was listening and Representative Clyburn, who I admire so much, his remarks, as well as the Reverend's, about keeping it short, that we wouldn't have a sermon. And it reminded me, actually, a few years ago, I went to a troop deployment in Oklahoma, and it was 109 degrees of our Minnesota National Guard. And they put the politicians in the sun so we wouldn't talk too long. And in the course of the whole thing, 17 people fainted. And they got water, they were fine. And I got home and I was on the phone to a friend telling the story of how I'd been in Oklahoma. It was 109 degrees and 17 people fainted. And my daughter, who was like 13 at the time, jumps up and yells down to my husband downstairs, "Dad, Mom talked so long today that 17 people fainted." So I will try not to have that happen again. So first of all, I'm sure many of you were at the debate or watched it. I continue on my message that despite kind of the slugfest that can go on there, that there is still so much more that unites us than divides us. And I think we have to remember that as we go forward, because when it comes to these issues of division and racial justice, we literally have a president right now in the White House who says after Charlottesville that there are two sides. Remember that? He said that. Well, when one side is the Ku Klux Klan, there are not two sides. There is only one side, and that is the American side. And we have to remember that what unites us here is that. Last night, I quoted Dr. King when he said that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny, that what affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. And by that, I mean, first of all, the kind of hate that this president has been spouting. You think about the words and how much that means to people. What does that mean to kids in Baltimore when they wake up in the morning and they find out that the President of the United States has called their city rat-infested? How do they feel? How do our immigrant kids feel when they hear the kinds of things and how he talks about immigrants? Words matter. What he says matters. Hate directed against one affects all of us, whether it is that horrific shooting by the white nationalists in the church right here, and you think about those victims and how they could get some justice for their families if we had a president that would actually think that closing the Charleston loophole would be a good thing, not only for safety, but for righteousness for those families. But he doesn't think that. Affects all of us. The stabbings in New York at the rabbi's house, the mosque in Minneapolis that was bombed by white nationalists just 2 years ago. All of that is happening right now. There's been this major increase in hate crimes. And what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And we all know it is the same when it comes to economics, which is why last night when I had my moment, I talked about broken promises to the African American community, that there have been too many broken promises and that we must make promises that we keep. And that includes passing Representative Clyburn's bill to invest in underinvested communities. There's absolutely no reason that we can't get this done. That includes more money into public education. The daughter of a teacher, I'm the mom of a child that went through the public schools. I went through the public schools. They mean everything to me. And investing in those schools and pre-K is what we need for a good start for any kid in their life, especially in the state of South Carolina. Increasing the minimum wage, understanding there's many paths to success. Actually getting this done is what's going to matter. Criminal justice reform. The fact that right now we have a movement going on across the country where we realize that when people get out of prison, they then should have their rights restored and they should be able to vote. When you have states like Florida voting to do that, even though they screwed up the implementation, that should mean something to us, that something's afoot. The fact that we were able to pass the First Step Act, which of course is only the First Step Act to reduce felony sentences on the federal level for nonviolent offenders, well, we should be doing the same thing for the 90% of people that are incarcerated in the state and local jails. And yes, I'm a former prosecutor. That was a job I did before I got to the Senate, and I think actually having someone that knows the system, the bad parts, the good parts, what needs to be changed, which is everything from the way we handle grand juries to eyewitness identifications, I think that makes a difference. Someone that admits there has been enormous racism in our criminal justice system, and that must change. Voting rights. None of this is going to happen unless African Americans are able to vote. And you have right now what's going on, as the North Carolina court said just a few years ago, that they are discriminating this administration and their friends with, quote, surgical precision. Those aren't my words. Those are words in a court case by a Republican-appointed judge when they looked at what North Carolina had done to try to get people off the rolls. My friend Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia right now if it wasn't for the voting violations. There is no doubt about that. And she once said this. She said, you know, just because you haven't gone to church for a while, or to synagogue or mosque, just because you haven't gone, you don't lose your right to vote, to worship under the Constitution. Just because you don't go to meetings like this and are already at 8 in the morning and maybe not everyone's here, you don't lose your right to assemble. And just because you haven't gone and voted in every single election, you shouldn't have to show up at the voting booth and find out you lose your right to vote. But that is exactly what voting purges are, and that is why, as president, I will stop the voting purges. That is my bill right now, to get rid of that, to get rid of gerrymandering, and to automatically register every kid in this country when they turn 18 to vote. The last thing I'll say is this. My background, it is not Donald Trump's background. It is not one of privilege like so many in this community. It is one of resilience. My grandpa, he was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground. His parents died when he was really young. He was the oldest son. He had to raise his 9 brothers and sisters. The youngest had been taken to an orphanage in Duluth, and he borrowed a car 2 years later. She was 8 years old, and brought her back. My grandma and grandpa had 2 boys. They saved money in a coffee can in a basement to send my dad and his brother to a 2-year community college. From there, my dad gets a 4-year degree at the University of Minnesota, becomes a writer, a sports writer, covered the Vikings. Actually, once wrote a book that is sadly still relevant today called Will the Vikings Ever Win the Super Bowl? My mom grows up in Milwaukee, no money, wants to be a teacher, comes to Minnesota because they had strong teachers union, and taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. So I stand before you today as a granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as a daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, as the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for President of the United States. That's because we live in a country of shared dreams, that no matter where you come from or who you know or the color of your skin or how much money you have or where you worship or who you love, that you can make it in the United States of America. Donald Trump, he got $413 million from his dad in the course of his life. And I can tell you, you cannot fit $413 million in a coffee can in the basement of my grandpa's house. But when you are given a family's trust, and my grandpa gave me that trust in that coffee can, then you have an obligation. An obligation not to go in the world with a sense of entitlement. An obligation to go into the world with a sense of opportunity, obligation to lift people up instead of pushing them down, to bring people with you instead of hoarding it for yourself. So that is the grit that I bring to this race. The grit learned from starting your campaign in the middle of a Minnesota blizzard and no one ever thought you could get through it because you had 4 inches of snow on your head. The grit from growing up with a dad who struggled with alcoholism his whole life and only got through it when, in his words, when he got the treatment, he was pursued by grace. The grit from having your daughter born and she's sick and you thought it was going to be perfect and she's in and out of hospitals for the first few years and you get kicked out of the hospital, which I did in 24 hours, and I went to the legislature and got one of the first laws passed in the country guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. That was my start in politics. That is how I began my journey. So with that, I just want to thank you, and I want to remind you, no matter what you see on that debate stage, we all know what our mission is. We all know what's important, and no one knows more than the people in this room. And that is that we have to win. We have to stop this injustice. We have to beat Donald Trump. And the way that we do it is with a fired-up Democratic base, which has always been rooted in the African-American community. My argument is you've got a lot on your shoulders. You have carried that torch for a long time, and that maybe you need some friends, that we need some people to join this big coalition. And it's got to be people that stayed home in the election, or even some of those people that voted for other candidates, that we've got to build this big coalition to bring people with us because they are ready to do it. But only if we have a candidate that doesn't push them away, but brings them with us. Because this is my last thing I'll say. We may have lost an election in 2016, but we didn't lose hope. Thank you for carrying the torch of that hope. Let's go on and win this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Reverend Al.
Senator Amy Klobuchar. Let me say this. Senator, you see that gentleman, that's Roland Martin. Your folks need to get with him. Y'all need to talk to the black press. You know, I don't talk out both sides of my mouth. What I say on radio, I say in public. I say I was going to tell you and Pete and all y'all, talk to the black. There's Roland right there. So y'all get that together. Did I do my assignment, sir? All right. Thank you. All of us have different roles. And if we support each other in our roles, then we'll get where we got to go. Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, when he announced he was running, I did not know him. There were those in South Bend in the activist community that had questions. There were others that embraced him and spoke very highly of him. He came to Harlem and met me at Sylvia's restaurant. And as many of you know, Sylvia comes from South Carolina. And it is where Barack Obama and I went. So I take a lot of politicians there. And as we sat there, what struck me about him was not only did he have a thorough understanding of the issues, he had a sensitivity of what needed to be done, and he was very open about what may have gotten wrong or right. We talked about all of the controversies. But the thing that most was different to me about Mayor Pete was I have taken many politicians, Reverend Rivers to Sylvia's. He is the only one that when we got finished, he walked around the restaurant shaking everybody's hand at every table. And I was saying, I don't know if you want to do that now. This is Harlem, and we don't know you that well. But he walked up, Mayor Pete, I'm running for president. There were about 100 people outside yelling Mayor Pete, so everybody knew he was there. And his openness and his willingness to take potential flack is something that I never would forget. It speaks to his authenticity. And he calls me every week, and we talk never about who I'm going to endorse, but about what we see needs to happen in this country. And his partner told me last night, he said he's canceled some events, but he's, because he has a bad cold, he's going to cancel some events, but he's coming to the breakfast where you're honoring leaders in the community. I said, well, a lot of them are faith leaders. Maybe we'll heal him before he leaves the church today. Let us hear from the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Good morning. Thanks for indulging me if my voice comes and goes. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for your leadership, and thank you for that meal at Sylvia's. I feel that every time I see you, we are breaking bread in some way, so thanks for keeping us well-fed in body as well as spirit. I want to acknowledge Whip Clyburn, whose grandson Walter is doing such good work on our campaign. Reverend Rivers, thank you, and whose son Chris is one of the minds that helped shape our immigration policy and joined us at First Baptist Church on Sunday. As you saw, we had quite a debate last night and continue to make our case going into Saturday, knowing that there are a lot of voters who looked at us over the course of the last year and said, call us back when there's less than 20 of you, and are still making up their minds. And I am here to ask for your vote to help end this presidency and the forces that brought this president to office, and to help us get to a brighter future. And it is humbling. It is humbling to ask anyone for their vote. But it is particularly so when addressing black voters whose vote was earned through generations of struggle, through blood and sweat and tears, just to have access to the ballot box, and a vote that for so many was only one within living memory. And so I'm asking for that vote knowing how hard won it is, knowing it is the vote of those with a great deal at stake, knowing it's the vote also of those who have been taken for granted far too often by politics as usual. And I am going to do everything in my power to earn that vote, not just going into the election, but throughout the presidency I'm proposing to create. Reverend Holt was kind enough to host Pastor Taylor from South Bend on my behalf about a week ago. And I remember going to Pastor Taylor's church, one of the growing churches in South Bend, a decade or so ago, when I was asking for votes in my own community, running for mayor, asking the people of my hometown to trust me to take a risk on a big vision from a new candidate. I remember the pastor saying to me, after a couple, maybe 3 times I'd come along, he said, "I like you. Everybody knows how to come to my church before an election. I want to see what you do next." And I'll tell you what happened next. Not only did I keep coming, but we were able to team up on things like affordable housing, forming a nonprofit to partner with the city, because I know how important it is to deliver. And the people who I serve, some of them who have come here to South Carolina to share South Bend's story, will share how we showed up after that election, how we got together and took a city that was described as dying in the national media, and got that city growing. How a diverse and low-income city like South Bend cut black unemployment, cut black poverty faster than what happened around the country. We're nationally recognized for the investments we made in businesses and neighborhoods that had been left behind. But they will also tell you about the unfinished business in our city, the work that remains to be done, the need to confront the effects of institutional racism on policing, on what has happened in the disparities of those impacted both by policing itself and by violent crime. And they will tell you that there were times when we did not get it right. They will tell you about mistakes that I made and the process that we went through to make sure that we got better each passing day. And the most important thing was to acknowledge the experiences that I don't have. I was particularly humbled to be aware that last night there was a discussion of racial justice among 7 white candidates standing on a debate stage. It was hard to miss. And I am mindful of the fact that I will never know what it is like, walking down a street or walking through a mall, to feel eyes on me, assessing me, believing me to be dangerous without knowing the first thing about what I'm actually like, just because of the color of my skin. I will not have that experience. I will not have the experience, should I be wheeled into an emergency room, that experience that so many black women in particular have had, of being less likely to be believed when I describe being in pain just because of the color of my skin, which we know is one of the reasons why there is a gap in maternal mortality. I have not had the experience of having to sit down and have the talk with my son about what to do when you're pulled over. When I am pulled over, I roll my eyes and wonder how much the ticket is going to be. And I know that fellow Americans tighten their grip on the steering wheel, feeling for their lives. I do not understand from lived experience what that is like. And so the next best thing I can do is listen to those who have. Seek out the voices of those who have and ask them to shape a vision that will be big enough to fit everyone. And I have sought that out from South Bend leaders like Miss Gladys Mohammed, who is on the road with us, or South Carolina leaders like Representative J.A. Moore, who turned tragedy into action and whose support I'm so thankful to have. And I trust, Reverend, everybody here, that if anybody here sees me straying, somebody will let me know, because that is what we must do. So as somebody who, of course, has not got everything right, my personal commitment is to always show up, to always listen, to always learn, and to empower the voices that must be heard in my White House, as we have sought to do in the campaign. And I know that the black community, in spite of everything, in spite of the broken promises, in spite of being taken for granted, has kept faith in the future. And this is our shot to redeem that faith, because the image I always keep in my mind is how it's going to be that first day the sun comes up over the low country and the rest of the United States of America, and Donald Trump is no longer the President of the United States. That's the day we're working toward. Of course, we got to make sure we bring that day about. And last night you heard us air some of the differences, in particular my differences with my friend Senator Sanders on what it's going to take in order to do that. In particular, the responsibility that the top of the ticket has to make sure that we're winning up and down the ticket, because I want to keep somebody like Joe Cunningham in Congress, send somebody like Jamie Harrison to the Senate, and say goodbye to Lindsey Graham, not the other way around. So we got to work together on that. That's why I will be a nominee who will call out to fellow diehard Democrats, invite independents to join us, and even continue to draw across what I like to call the future former Republicans, who are themselves having trouble looking their kids in the eye and explaining this president to their children. And I'm ready to go toe-to-toe with this president. Wouldn't you like to see a president who talks a lot about the forgotten people have to stand next to somebody, not a millionaire, somebody who actually lives and works in a racially diverse community in the heart of the industrial Midwest, who can call him out on the fact that the only economic promise he's ever kept is tax cuts for corporations? Wouldn't you like to see a president who went out of his way to avoid serving when it was his turn, stand next to a veteran who will remind him of all the reasons why a traumatic brain injury is more serious than bone spurs, and why it is not patriotic to pardon war criminals? And being among ministers, I would also suggest that a president who likes to cloak himself in religion, this president ought to be held to account by somebody not afraid to remind fellow believers that God does not belong to a political party in the United States of America. Wouldn't that be nice? We can build an American majority that agrees not just who we're against, but what we're for. An American majority for acting on climate change and health care. An American majority that stands with the workers like those I marched with in Charleston this week on the principle that one job ought to be enough, whether you have a college degree or not, in this country. A majority that sees the hatred that took 9 lives at Mother Emanuel, and the mass shootings at schools around the country, and the loss of our youth, so often our black youth, day after day after day in communities from South Carolina to my own hometown, and knows that the time has come to end the use of the Second Amendment as an excuse to do nothing at all about gun violence when we know we can be saving thousands of American lives. There is an American majority today that wants that to happen, and that knows that we must act to bring about the day when your race has no bearing on your health or on your wealth or on your access to education or to the vote or your experience with law enforcement. And I am proud that we have put forward the most comprehensive vision of any campaign to achieve that, beginning with the understanding that you cannot just wipe away a racist policy and replace it with a neutral one and expect that to deliver equality. We have to act proactively and with urgency, and that is the idea of the Frederick Douglass Plan, shaped by black voices on this campaign. To triple the number of entrepreneurs from underserved communities, to use the purchasing power of the federal government to help build up a black middle class, to triple our funding to Title I schools and dedicate $50 billion to the HBCUs that are creating the next generation of black doctors and black teachers and black astronauts. Addressing those health disparities with an empowered Office of Health Equity and Justice and health equity zones so that communities can target strategies for neighborhoods. And with black home ownership at the lowest level since housing discrimination was lawful in this country, the time has come for a 21st century Homestead Act to address those families that have been redlined into neighborhoods only to be gentrified right back out of them when the prices start to go up, and allow them to build equity and build wealth to deal with that wealth gap. And we must make our criminal legal system worthy of being called a justice system, cutting incarceration in half, reversing the harms of the war on drugs, and yes, expunging records so people can get their lives back on track and can re-enter. And of course, all of this depends on access to the vote, which is why the time has come, in a season when we see voter suppression from the purging of rolls to the closing of polling places. Excuse me. The time has come for a 21st century Voting Rights Act to make sure that that kind of voter suppression will not stand. So these are the policies we need, but I know that the vision has to be even bigger than that. We need a chance to build a sense of belonging in this country. Whether it is a father having the talk, or a gig worker driving to make ends meet, even though she's got 2 jobs already, or the 9-year-old boy I met wondering if something inside of him meant he would forever be on the outside in our society, we can let them know you are part of this future that we are building. And I'm asking for your vote based on my understanding of what the presidency is for. I'm not seeking this office because I would like to have it. I'm seeking this office because I believe the presidency has a purpose. That the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president. It is the empowerment and the unification of the American people to do these big things. That's what this election is about. And part of what the presidency in the right hands could do is bring us together as one American people, as one body. I'm thinking of the scripture that says that even though the body is made up of many parts, it is one body. That if the foot says to the hand, because I am not, I promise I will leave the preaching to the professional preachers, but it is on my mind, that scripture that says that if the foot says to the hand, because I'm not a hand, I am not part of the body, it's not any less part of the body. And if the eye says to the ear, because I'm not an ear, I am not part of the body, it's not any less part of the body. That if the whole body were an eye, the scripture says, where would the sense of hearing be? And I hold this in contrast to a president who, on the day he was sworn in, said, I alone can fix it. Mr. President, nobody this side of paradise can fix anything alone. We are in this together. We need each other. And that is the spirit of the presidency that I'm asking for your vote to help us create. Thank you for the chance to stand before you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your passion. And I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mayor Reverend Pete Buttigieg. He took a text this morning. Our next candidate and I started speaking way before he decided to run for president. Tom Steyer has built an organization and movement around climate change, around impeaching the president, around issues of criminal justice, and began meeting with many of us even before he decided to run. I remember many evenings in New York having dinner with him, and the passion and determination you've seen on stage, he had even 3 or 4 years ago. And when he decided to run, that has not in any way diluted. He has built a business, but he's made it his business to stand for issues and has stood for them as a presidential candidate. May we hear from Tom Steyer.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking Reverend Rivers for having us here today. Thank you so much for hosting. And I want to thank Reverend Sharpton for his leadership throughout all the years and decades. And I want to talk a little bit about why I'm running for president and what's in my heart. And let me say this. I come from a family, I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. My mom was a teacher in the New York public schools, and that was her way of participating in the Civil Rights Movement. She ran reading programs in overwhelmingly African-American schools in New York, and when she got too old to do that, she went and taught reading to prisoners at the Brooklyn House of Detention. My father was a lawyer in New York. He's the first generation in his family to go to college. He graduated from college at 18. He graduated from law school at 21. He left the law to go into the Navy after Pearl Harbor. And at the end of the war, because he had a law degree, he was the assistant to the chief prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals at the Nuremberg trial. And what my parents believed in, and what they taught my 2 brothers and me, is that it is your job to stand up for justice in this society. Faith without works is dead. That's what they believed. My mother was one of the most religious people I've ever met. But faith without works is dead. That's why I started the Need to Impeach movement. Because I saw a president at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who I thought was evil, who I thought was a racist, who I thought broke the law, put himself ahead of the American people, and stood for everything I disagree with. And 8.5 million Americans signed the petition to say there's still such a thing as right or wrong. But let me say this, it is no coincidence that some of the people who were talking about this even before I was Representative Al Green from Houston, who brought it up because he said this man's a racist, he has to be impeached. And Representative Maxine Waters from Los Angeles, who did an amazing job of talking about this. The reason I'm running for president is that I believe that the American people have been taken advantage of, but beyond that, I believe that we are very far from racial justice in the United States of America, that there is a dramatic racial subtext to every policy area in the United States that goes unspoken, and that unless we address it specifically, we don't address race and we don't address the policy area. So I am one of the people who is running for president. I think I'm the only person who says I'm for reparations for slavery. And why is that true? Because that's the truth. That we actually have to tell the story of what's happened over the last 400 years in terms of legalized discrimination, injustice, and cruelty, but also of the incredible contribution to American society by the African American community. And that when we acknowledge that contribution in building America, but to me also the moral leadership that African Americans have given the whole country for generations and centuries, is something that needs to be acknowledged and thanked, because actually to this very day, I believe that African Americans are providing the moral leadership for this country right now. I have an agenda for Black America that is out, but it is not an agenda that I wrote sitting in a room. I've come to South Carolina more than any other candidate. I have traveled and talked to people to see what it means not to be able to drink the water that comes out of the faucet in Denmark. I've had dinner with the people there. I haven't drunk the water, but I've eaten the food. I know what it means to be in a medical desert, because one of the people in our campaign lost a first cousin because the ambulance couldn't get him to the hospital on time 2 weeks ago, and a goddaughter 4 weeks ago because the ambulance couldn't get her to the hospital on time. I have traveled South Carolina to see the wages, how little people make. $7.25 minimum wage is an insult to working people. I would more than double the minimum wage. That's a raise for tens of millions of people. Look, Donald Trump is a racist. He is. He is also an incompetent president. His economy is not working for working Americans. It's specifically not working for working Black Americans. We have got to get him out, not just because he's a racist, not just because he's a criminal, not just because he's corrupt. He's bad at his job. He can't do his job. He has given tax breaks to rich people and big corporations, and he thinks that's what works. But we all know that's not true. We know that his trade war has failed. We need economic policies that work for working Americans. I would give a 10% tax cut to everyone who makes less than $250,000, and it's easy to do. Tax rich people and corporations fairly, and you can give everybody else a 10% tax cut, no problem. I'd create millions of good-paying union jobs, over 4.5 million a year, because we have to rebuild this country. Look, we're in a climate crisis. People in South Carolina have to know we're in a climate crisis that affects you all. I fought on this for over a decade. I've always started with environmental justice. I've always started in the black and brown communities where you can't breathe or drink the tap water safely. I know that's where the leadership comes from. People think climate is a science problem. It's a human problem with a gigantic racial subtext. Get leadership from the black and brown community, you win everything. You're right, you have the just policy. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And let me say this, I'm not coming here and promising you policies that I made up. I have been doing this for a long time. I started a community bank to service the people who've been shut out, to service black entrepreneurs, Latino entrepreneurs, and women entrepreneurs, because banks are so prejudiced. I did that 15 years ago. It's over $1 billion. I want to put black people in charge of their economic destiny. People are talking about what they're gonna do. Let me tell you what I have done. Look, I'm the person here who wants a 12-year term limit for every congressperson and senator. And you know why? Because I want new and different people in charge. Different people. You want to get rid of Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz? Term limits. New people in charge. Younger people, blacker people, browner people, more female people. It is time for an honest-to-goodness change. Look, I'm not just coming here. I've been doing this. When we talk about the empowerment of black entrepreneurs, look, I was in Nevada, and they just built a stadium there. The Raiders have moved from Oakland to Las Vegas. They built a new stadium, it's fancy. 1% of the contracts to build that stadium went to black people. That's outrageous. That is outrageous. And so a 75-year-old African-American minister said, Tom, what do you think about that? And I said, well, let me say something. When there's a quota for black entrepreneurs, it's outrageous, but when there's a 99% quota for the old boy network, it's all good. That's got to change. This is completely different. Let me say this. I've worked on criminal justice for a long time. They want me to stop. Let me finish quickly. I've worked on that for decades. Faith without works is dead. Let me say the last thing. I'm telling you, the African-American community has led this country before Dr. King, by Dr. King, and after Dr. King. On Saturday, South Carolina gets to speak. It's 65% of the Democrats in South Carolina are black. There gets to be a new reset. We don't have to go with a socialist who thinks the government has to take over big parts of the economy. We don't have to go with a Republican who did stop and frisk. The Democrats in South Carolina get to make a reset. It's 2/3 African Americans. That is appropriate. I've said from the beginning, the African American community is the moral leaders. The African American community gets to choose the next president. That's what happens on Saturday. I'm asking for your vote. Not only have I done this for years, I'm talking to ministers. I write a cross on my hand to remind myself, you do the right thing every day, even if they put you on the cross. That's what I'm here to tell you. That's what I'm going to promise you I'm going to do. Under all circumstances, no matter what it costs, I will stand up for this community because something wrong has happened that has to be repaired so that we can move forward together in a just society. Thank you very much.
Give another hand, Tom Steyer. I was privileged at a very young age, 18 years old. I worked as the youth coordinator for Shirley Chisholm's campaign for president. So I knew the gender bias as well as the racial bias firsthand. There's a woman running for president this year that has had to face gender bias even in the progressive community, but has done so gallantly and has, I think, more than anyone, impacted how consumers and regular working class people are treated by big business, big banking, and big insurance. Whether or not she is successful as president, she's already been a game changer for those of us in our community that have been targeted by those industries. She and I have communicated and worked together over the last several years, and it is with great pride I bring you my friend and sister, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Good morning. Good morning, National Action Network. You know, I want to say a word about National Action Network. They've been on the front lines in the fight for social, racial, and economic justice. You have challenged leaders, Democrats and Republicans, and made real progress in this country. And that progress is possible because of the vision of your leader, the Reverend Al Sharpton. Can we just say so? It's been amazing. You know, I am honored to be here this morning with ministers of the gospel as we fight to build a brighter future, a future where we achieve racial, social, and economic justice. I grew up in the Methodist Church out in Oklahoma. Faith is just a part of who we are. When I had babies, I took my babies to church, and I always helped in the little ways. I was the person you could count on to bring a covered dish. I always helped with the costumes for whatever pageant the children were doing, and I was always glad to do it. But I was a young mom and a full-time teacher myself, and that was kind of where I paused. Then the pastor came to me one day and he said, Elizabeth, we need you to teach a 5th grade Sunday school class. And I said, oh, Pastor, I don't think I can do that. And he said, well, we really need you to teach this. We've had some changes in the teachers and so on. And I said, oh, Pastor, I just really feel like I kind of am up to the edge of what I can do. And finally grabbed my arm and he said, I gotta have somebody watch those kids. So he persisted. So I said, well, okay, I've never taught 5th graders. I actually at the time was teaching in law school. Before I had taught special needs kids, but they had been 4 to 6-year-olds. I never had 5th graders. And I said, so what do you expect of me here? And he said, well, as long as nobody gets hurt. He said, we think it'll work just fine. And it was a complete disaster. I will confess this to all of you. In the first few weeks, the children managed to cut each other's hair. The boys, fortunately we were all on the first floor, the boys all climbed out the window one Sunday. I lost them all. I tried an art project where everyone's clothes, the front of them ended up blue. The kids were energetic, is the nice way to put it. But I thought about this, and I thought, I'm failing these children. This is not working. So I thought, what are you good at? I thought, dang, I'm good at teaching, so surely I can do better than this. So the next Sunday I went in and I had a little clipped out piece and I photocopied it of just a very short story of one of Jesus' parables. And I said, let's all just read this. Everybody read quietly, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. We kind of made it through. Next week, I clipped out a little kind of children's version of the story of Noah. So I sat down with the kids after they read it, and I said, so what did you learn? And what do you think Noah thought when he heard the voice of God? And of course, you can imagine fifth grade boys. Oh, he thought he was going crazy. He thought there was a worm who was talking in his ear. But they finally started getting the idea. And over time, we talked quite seriously about one Bible story after another until we talked one day about a story, and we were into the middle of what it means, what charity means, and the difference between giving because you're obligated and giving from charity. And so we started talking about what human beings owe each other because they're obligated. Not that it's an option, but you're obligated. And I still remember one little boy named Jesse who rarely spoke. He was a big kid, but very quiet. And Jesse raised his hand and said, it means everybody gets a turn. And I thought about that, and I think of that as very much like the story of Matthew 25, that no matter who you are, there is God in every one of us, and that it is our responsibility to treat everyone as if that God in you is the one that we speak to. So, rich or poor, black or white, gay or straight, young or old, male or female, God in every one of us. And that's what I fight for, and I think we fight for every day. Uplifting and protecting the divine in each and every one of us. I'm here today because, like you, I believe that every person has value. And like you, I don't just believe it, I am determined to act upon it. I've traveled this country listening and learning, and I've found that the American people know what's right, and they are ready to act. They know that they have been called to a time such as this, and I believe they are willing to step up. So I'm here today to say, for all the good work that you have done, you are not alone in this fight. When I am President of the United States, we will answer this call together. For me, I want to be clear. This call is not for empty promises. This call is not for vague ideas. This call is for real plans to make real changes in the lives and communities of people across this country. And yes, I have a plan for that. For too many today, there are some who would touch your life. I have proposed, for example, a 2-cent wealth tax on the richest 1/10 of 1%. So here's a little tiny tax on the richest people in this country. And what can we do with 2 cents? For 2 cents, we can provide universal health care and early education for every single one of our babies. Think about what that means. And think about what it means for their mamas. and for their daddies. We can do universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. And we can stop exploiting the people, largely African American and Latina women. We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. We can pay for all of that federally, and we can put $800 billion of new federal money into our public schools. Think what that would mean. Quadruple the funding of Title I schools, quadruple the funding. And coming from a former special education teacher, you'll appreciate this, for the first time in history, we could fully fund IDEA so every child with a disability would get the full educational opportunities they need. We can also make technical college, 2-year college, and 4-year college tuition free for every one of our kids. We can expand Pell Grants so it's a meaningful chance to go to college. And we can actually help level the playing field. $50 billion for our historically black colleges and universities. 2 cents. We can do all of that for our babies. We can do all of that for our public school children. We can do all of that for kids trying to get an education after high school. Plus, we can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. We would help close the black-white wealth gap for people with student loan debt by nearly 20 points. To me, that is about making a real difference in people's lives. This is about money, you bet it is, but it is about our values and where we make our investments. We can leave that 2 cents with the richest billionaires in this country, people who are already growing their fortunes at 4%, 6%, 8% a year, or we can say take just 2 cents of that and invest in an entire generation of young people. That is how we build a future. People tease me because I have so many plans, but the plans are important. This is a moment when we can make changes. I have a plan to fund black entrepreneurship and close the black-white wealth gap in small businesses. I have a plan to counter the effects of redlining. I have a plan to end the mass incarceration of millions of our brothers and sisters. I will ban private prisons from the first day I'm in office. No one should make a profit by locking people up. And I have a plan to make sure every citizen gets to vote and that every vote gets counted. I understand that this is a moment of tremendous challenge, and in 3 days, South Carolina, you're going to move us one step closer to getting Donald Trump out of office. I'm here today to ask for your vote because I believe that we have been called to this moment of crisis. And today I make you this promise. When I am president, we answer this call together. We answer the call to build an America where healthcare, housing, education are basic human rights for everyone. We answer the call to where the difference between a good education and a prison sentence isn't just a few blocks. We answer the call so that a run-in with law enforcement or a turn down the wrong street corner doesn't cost you your life because of the color of your skin. We answer the call so that we have an America where a federal solution for local problems are made by local communities for local communities. When I am president, we will have an America where every day the person in the White House talks about how every human being has value, and where we turn our backs on no one. It is an honor to be here with you today. My pastor is here with me, Reverend Culpepper. Who I will let you in on a little secret. If you think I do all right in the debates, it is because Reverend Culpepper prays over me before I go out. Power of prayer, Reverend. I want to thank you all for all that you're going to do. We truly do have this moment in history that has come to us. Let us answer the call together. Thank you. Please keep me in your prayers. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Elizabeth Warren. Our last speaker is the front runner. And many never thought that Bernie Sanders and front runner would be in the same sentence. But if you had any doubt, they said when I was a younger activist and started getting a lot of attacks, an older mentor of mine said, Reverend Al, when you know you are doing well, is think of civil rights like a football game. They only run to tackle you if you're the one with the ball. Nobody tackles anyone that doesn't have the ball because they can't score. Bernie Sanders and I have known each other. We've talked about issues for years. He's been consistent. If he did something that we disagreed, he could be the first one to explain it and convert you, or be open to being converted. But I want to say this, and I'm going to have a lot more to say in the next day or so about this campaign, but I think it's important in South Carolina. The civil rights movement always was targeted by those that would use the Red Scare. I talked the other night at Trinity University where Klobuchar Brown was there about how when I started my youth group, Bayard Rustin gave me the money. Bayard Rustin was an organizer, the chief organizer of the March on Washington. They would not let him take a public profile because they said he was a communist. They accused Dr. King of being a communist. Every major leader in the 60s, they tried to call socialists a communist. Whatever you decide to do on Saturday, do not go by those that use the socialist tag to try to separate us from what we need to do for this country. Because we've been down that road before, and we are not that stupid to allow you to tell us who is what. Socialism, capitalism, all of it has not worked fairly for black folks. So those that rob us say, don't deal with them, they socialists. The socialists don't socialize with us, don't deal with them because they rob us. It's time for all of us to be treated fairly. And what he has represented has been fair. I judge people, the Bible says you judge a tree by the fruit it bears. How do I know Bernie Sanders? I know him because we talk, I know him because we communicate, but I know him because I trust Nina Turner and I talk to her. I know him because I talk to Cornel West. We fuss and fight like brothers do, but I talk to him. I talk to Philip Agnew, and they talk about the respect and access they have on staff. You got to talk to the people that walk with a man to know who a man is. They know how they are when they back at the hotel. Because they can tell me anything, but if you don't empower the blacks around you, you will not empower the black community. So I want us, when you make up your mind this week, if socialism's on your mind, read about what they said about Martin Luther King and others. If other things are on your mind, weigh it in the balance. But do not let others tell you, I will put it this way. When Nelson Mandela was freed from jail, and came to address the UN. I was honored to be part of the delegation. I will never forget, he went one night, Bernie, to Senator Bernie. I'm sorry. Don't want to disrespect you. I don't want us to. But he went one night to do an interview with Ted Koppel. And they challenged Dr. King on certain people that he had dealt with, including the president of Cuba. And he said to Ted Koppel, wait a minute, I sat in jail 27 years. Don't choose our friends or our enemies. To have an assessment does not mean you are signing on to everything somebody says. If I'm going to condemn Sanders for an analysis, then I can't say I came out of the King movement as a teenager. So I wanted to clear that up because a lot of folk talking don't know what they talking about. Those of us that had to fight for the right to vote need to use that vote in a fair way, fair to those that fought for it. And one of them that came south to fight for that and was arrested was the senator from the state of Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Well, let me begin by thanking Reverend Al and the National Action Network for the courageous work you do every single day. Whenever there is a national crisis, whenever there is an outbreak of white nationalism, I find the National Action Network and Al Sharpton there with courage. Thank you all very much for what you're doing. And let me say what everybody in this room knows, that it is a moral imperative that we defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country, that we cannot tolerate for another 4 years a president who is a pathological liar, who is running a corrupt administration, who is a racist. Let's never, ever forget that before Trump took office, he was the leader of the so-called birther movement. All remember that? Trying not to disagree with President Obama, but to delegitimize him. That's the guy in the White House. He is a sexist, he is a homophobe, he is a xenophobe, and he is a religious bigot. And no matter what your political point of view may be, we as Americans understand that is not the kind of person we want in the White House. As Reverend Al kind of mentioned, I have been active in the civil rights movement for my entire adult life. I know that most candidates do not come forward and tell you about the times they were arrested. Probably not what you put on your resume. But I am proud to tell you that when I was a young man at the University of Chicago, I was arrested fighting housing segregation in Chicago. Took on the University of Chicago dealing with school segregation. Worked with SNCC and the civil rights movement in the South trying to provide the help that they desperately needed. And I know I date myself when I tell you I was there for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom back in 1963, and that Dr. King has played an enormously important role in inspiring what I do. But it's obviously not just Dr. King's dream who we are trying to fulfill. It is people like Ella Baker, who played a pivotal role in the NAACP and the SNCC movement. People like Fannie Lou Hamer, the co-founder of the Freedom Democratic Party. I'm old enough to remember that. People like the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And I am proud to tell you that in 1988, long time ago, I was one of the few white elected officials. I was mayor of the city of Burlington who endorsed Jesse Jackson, who brought him to Vermont, and we won Vermont for Jesse Jackson. And I am very proud to tell you that I've worked with the Reverend Al Sharpton for so many years on so many issues, and I applaud him for his courage. You know, when things get hot, some people run away, some people run toward it. Reverend Al and your movement runs toward the crisis and the danger, prepared to take on all kinds of opposition. Clearly, there have been ups and downs in the civil rights movement. We are all proud that in recent history we have passed major civil rights and voting rights laws. And I am old enough to tell you something, that 30 years ago, very few people in America would ever have believed that we would elect an African American as President of the United States and re-elect him. All right? We take it for granted now. Trust me, that was not always the case. And I was proud to support Barack Obama in both of his campaigns. And today, after the 2018 election, the Congressional Black Caucus that I work with as chairman of the House Progressive Caucus, now has the largest number of members in its entire history. But of course, we still have much work to be done, especially under Trump. And as I've traveled this country, I've met with so many heroes who are continuing the fight against racism in all of its ugly forms. And I think back now about a young woman named Erica Garner. I think many of you remember Erica Garner and her courage in standing up to police brutality and ugliness in New York City. And we also remember the memory of North Charleston's own Walter Scott and so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality. As Reverend Al just mentioned, Dr. King talked about socialism during his life. And what he said back then resonates today. This is what he said, and I quote, "This country has socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor," end of quote. You all know what that means? It means that people like Donald Trump, when he was a private real estate developer, received $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies in New York City to build luxury housing. That's called socialism for the rich. It means that major corporations today, like Amazon, made $11 billion last year in profits. You know how much money they paid in taxes? Not a nickel. It means that the Walton family, the wealthiest family in America, that pays its workers at Walmart starvation wages, we subsidize them because many of their workers at low wages have to go on Medicaid, food stamps, and public housing. So I think that maybe we need government policies that protect working families, not just billionaires. And right now, in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, we have massive disparities between the black and white communities. Not acceptable that white families have 10 times the wealth of black families. Not acceptable that the infant mortality rate in the black communities is more than double the white communities. Not acceptable that black women die in childbirth 3 times more than white women. Not acceptable that African American school districts do not receive the funding they need to provide quality education to their kids. Not acceptable that a young black male born today has a 1 in 4 chance of ending up in the criminal justice system. Racism is rampant. It's rampant in housing, in healthcare, in education, in financial services. And my promise to you is that instead of dividing the American people up, which is what Trump is doing, we're going to bring people together. We're going to end every form of ugly racism that exists in this country. Instead of letting the NRA determine gun policy, we're going to have gun policy determined by the American people. Universal background checks, ending the gun show loophole, ending the straw man provision, and ending something that I have believed in for 30 years. No more sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. We are going to have policy that works for workers. We're going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, at least $15 an hour. We're going to make public colleges and universities tuition-free, but $50 billion in HBCUs. We are going to finally do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to all people as a human right. We are going to end a broken and racist criminal justice system. In America, we should not have more people in jail, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American, than any other country on earth. We're going to invest in our kids. We're going to invest in jobs. We're not going to be investing in more jails and incarceration. So we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do. But I believe very strongly that if we stand together as black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, if we stand together for justice, for economic justice, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, when we stand together, we make profound change. That is the history of the civil rights movement, millions of people standing up for justice. It is the history of the women's movement. It is the history of the labor movement. It's the history of the gay rights movement and the environmental movement. No matter how powerful people on the top may be, no matter how powerful the oppressors may be, when ordinary people stand up and they look about them and say, you know what, we demand justice. When that happens, there is no stopping us. And that is what this campaign is about. So again, I want to thank Reverend Al and all of you for the extraordinary work you do. Let us go forward together. Let us defeat Donald Trump. Let us transform this country. Thank you all very much.
Would you give all of our candidates a round of applause? Let's thank Reverend Sharpton for his leadership down through the years and even in this season. As he has to leave to get a flight, give him a hand clap of praise. Now I'm going to ask you to be as kind to me as y'all were to all them candidates. Just want to have a moment of your time. We asked these 6, now 5, to accept our gift to them because of their work and service down through the years. One that we wanted to recognize, who let us know he could not be here, is the presiding prelate of the 7th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. That would be Bishop Sam Green. He could not be here, but he was the first one we called to ask him would he accept our award. What he has done for education, for justice, and helping move the AME Church to being almost AME Pentecostal. Warrens, I thank you. He is a fierce defender of the rights of HBCUs to excel, and for that we are grateful. So would you join me? We're going to present the award to him in person, hopefully this weekend when we go to Columbia. But would you thank Bishop Sam Green, the presiding prelate of the 7th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And to show we're not joking, that's his award. So, ran over here? Where's the singing somebody? Did y'all remember, I know you did, the funeral for our friend Clemente Pinckney? And y'all remember the person who took over? And I was teasing him, if I add up all the hits on all my YouTube, in the history of my life, it wouldn't be 7,000. And he has a video that has 700,000 hits when he sang that tremendous song at Clemente's homegoing. And he tried to convince me he didn't plan to sing, but I know better. So Reverend Randolph, the singing Somebody Miller, come on and receive this for Bishop Green. And he came all the way from Holly Hill to get that award. And somebody driving from Holly Hill ought to be able to stand up on the stage and receive the award. And we're glad about it. Let me quickly thank all of you for coming and delivering on a commitment that Trudy Grant and I made to Reverend Sharpton. When he asked us, will we do this? And he asked us, Pastor Benton, how many folk you think can come? I didn't answer. Trudy Grant said, Red, we can do about 300. And we spent 12 days in Africa knowing that was not going to be true. And we got back from Africa, and doggone if y'all didn't do it. So give the Lord a hand clap of praise for your faithfulness.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Shepherd. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, and while he's doing Unfiltered, I'm practicing the wobble. Yes, I am. Because Roland Martin's the one, he will do it backwards, he will do it on the side. He messes everybody up when he gets into the wobble, because he doesn't know how to do it, so he does it backwards. And it messes me up every single time. So, I'm working on it. I got it. You got Roland Martin.
Hi, my name is LaToya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Mac Wiles, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Shepherd. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, and while he's doing Unfiltered, I'm practicing the wobble. Yes, I am. Because Roland Martin's the one, he will do it backwards, he will do it on the side. He messes everybody up when he gets into the wobble, because he doesn't know how to do it, so he does it backwards. And it messes me up every single time. So, I'm working on it. I got it. You got Roland Martin.
Hi, my name is LaToya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Mac Wiles, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.